Hey guys, Derek and
Paula here.
from a guy, a girl, and a camper van. So we get a lot of questions about how warm it is in our van at night now that it's a really cold winter, and exactly how we stay warm whenever we get home from work. We're really lucky because we have a propane furnace that pumps out a ton of heat. Usually whenever we get home from work, it takes about 5 to 15 minutes for it to really warm up in here.
A typical routine is we walk in and it's really cold. We turn the furnace on and we actually stand in front of the furnace with our coats on until it actually warms up.
After that, we can adjust our thermostat to suit the outside temperature, and then it pretty much just takes care of itself.
Plus, when we cook dinner or we heat water for our dishes, that also adds additional heat to the van.
On most nights, we can regulate the temperature such that I'm comfortable in a t-shirt.
And I'm comfortable in a sweater.
However, once we go to bed at night, it's a bit of a different story. I mean, sure, we could just leave the thermostat turned up really high, but we found that there's a few other things that we can do to keep us really cozy and warm while also being a little bit more energy efficient. So we thought we would give you our top 5 tips for staying warm while sleeping in a camper van during a Canadian winter. All of these tips fall under 2 categories, either providing heat or retaining heat.
So tip number 1.
This happens to be my personal favorite tip, and it's simply find somebody to sleep with.
We're not that kind of channel, but it is true. If you share body heat, you do stay a lot warmer. Derek is like a furnace, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have similar partners where one just generates a lot of heat and the other is always cold. I'm always cold, so when I get too cold, I just snuggle up beside Derek and I warm right up.
And then if we both get a little bit too warm, we just spread back out again. So we're kind of like an automatic thermostat. We can just kind of roll in and roll out as we get cold, and it just sort of seems to happen even while we're asleep. We just sort of do it automatically.
It's interesting because there are times when Derek may not be home when I go to bed, or vice versa if I'm out working and he goes to bed before I get home. It's definitely different with just one person.
Yeah, that's true. I've spent a couple of nights here alone whenever you've been out, and it is way colder. Yeah. And that's funny because I'm the one who typically is usually a lot warmer than you are,
yeah.
but I still find it a lot cooler whenever you're
Absolutely.
Away. They often say if you're out stranded somewhere in the winter and somebody's suffering from hypothermia to crawl into a sleeping bag together, but it really, really does make a big difference.
Yeah. And when Derek's out for the night and I get too cold, this is who I snuggle up against. Walter.
Nice. He doesn't provide any heat, but he certainly makes you feel better, right?
He's cute.
Yeah. So tip number 2 is very similar to tip number 1. But if you don't have a person to snuggle up to, there's a lot of other things that can provide you some warmth. And the thing that we have found is the most useful is this. It's a heated sleeping pad. This one happens to be made by a company named Brunton, but I'm sure that there's probably a lot of others out there as well. The thing we love about this is it is...
on my side.
The thing we like about this is that in this little pouch, we've got a few things. First of all, we've got this long cable, and you'll notice that at the end of it is a typical USB connection. So basically you can plug this heating pad into anything that gives USB power, so such as a computer, a laptop. Lots of plugs on your wall these days are coming with little USB connections as well. But what we use, because of our situation, is this little portable battery pack. We can plug this into the USB connection, and on a full charge of this battery, we can actually run this heating pad on medium for...
all night.
Yeah, all night. Something like 10 hours or something like that. And essentially, it's just like a heated blanket, electric blanket. There's circuitry that runs through the whole thing, and it creates little warm spots all the way down it. And so we place this underneath the sheets on Paula's side of the bed, and it just keeps her warm throughout the night. And it's crazy because we actually have had a few nights where even when it was like minus 20, minus 30 temperatures, we were able to keep the furnace off the whole night and just use that, and we were still surprisingly toasty warm.
Did I mention it's on my side of the bed?
It's on Paula's side of the bed, but believe it or not, I actually get a lot of warmth from it as well. It may be small, but it pumps out a lot of heat. And so we find that to be super helpful. It has a little heat control button on it right here on the side. And whenever you press it, it turns on high, which is red. Press it again, yellow, which is medium, and one more time for green, which is low.
Once it gets heated up and the bed gets nice and warm, I can't even handle the higher or the medium. I often sleep for the rest of the evening on low.
And the great thing about this little light on here is that even whenever we have it underneath the fitted sheet around our mattress on the bottom, this light actually glows right through it, and so we can control it and see exactly what setting it's on, even though it's buried underneath a sheet.
And that's good for times where Derek rolls over on it and turns it off.
A quick look lets you know that it's off and you can
Yeah,
turn it back on.
That's right.
If you don't happen to have a battery-operated heating pad, there are other options as well. First of all, we've got just your standard hot water bottle. If you fill this with really hot water before getting into bed, as long as you make sure that the seal is nice and tight, this will actually release heat for several hours while you sleep. And so you can move it to your feet. If your feet get cold, you can kind of cuddle up to it if you're just feeling cold overall. But this is a really good tip for keeping warm, especially if you're by yourself. And if you don't have a hot water bottle, then even just a regular old Nalgene bottle will work too. It doesn't have to be a Nalgene brand, but Nalgene happen to be heat resistant, and we know that they've got a really nice tight seal, so they're a really good one to look for. But any other bottle that you feel comfortable putting hot water in will work as well. But if you don't have a hot water bottle, or you don't have any ability to make hot water, we do have one more suggestion for you, and it's these little guys. These are little hand warmers. You open the package and it has a little chemical filled packet, and whenever you give it a shake, it starts to heat up. So if you were to put that in your pocket, it would contain the heat and you could put your hand in your pocket of your jacket. But we found that if you put that inside your bed, it'll do the same thing. And these ones stay warm for 10 hours. Some stay warm for 12 hours, 16 hours, some are as short as 4 hours. So make sure that you look at the packets whenever you buy them. And these, we bought a pack of, I think 20 of these for about $11. So they're fairly cheap.
I love these things because not only do they keep you warm when you're holding them, but you can easily throw them in the bed to warm up the bed before you even crawl in.
Absolutely, and that actually brings us to tip number 3, which is start warm to stay warm. So whenever you crawl into bed, if you're crawling into a cold bed, then you're going to have to use a lot of your body heat to warm that bed up.
That's no fun.
No, it's not. So if you've got a heating pad, if you've got a hot water bottle, or the hand warmers that we talked about, then just throw those into the bed about 10 minutes before, and you'll be crawling into nice, cozy, warm sheets instead of frigid, cold bedding. But you also need to make sure that your body temperature is already up before you crawl into that bed. And so one of the ways that we've found to do that is actually to just have a nice hot cup of tea. There's differing opinions about exactly how that works in your body. Some say that it warms your core temperature, some say that it doesn't. But either way, it definitely makes you feel a lot better.
And it keeps your hands warm.
But while you're making sure that your body temperature is up, it's also really important to make sure that it isn't too far up to the point that you're actually sweating. Because if you go to bed when you're sweaty or feeling a little bit damp, that'll actually pull the body heat away from you a lot quicker. So if you're, let's just say, wearing socks that are a little bit wet from being outside earlier in the day, it's best to make sure that you replace those with socks that are nice and dry and clean.
And fuzzy. I like fuzzy socks.
And last thing, if you did just drink a big cup of tea, it's also best if you do your best to go for a pee before you get into bed. That serves two purposes. First of all, if you've got a bladder that's just full of liquid, eventually your body's going to have to spend a lot of energy trying to keep that warm throughout the night. And while it's keeping that warm, less attention is being spent on keeping things like your fingers and your toes warm. So it's best if you can empty out that bladder before you get into bed. The other reason why that's important is because If you've got a full bladder whenever you go to bed, chances are at some point during the night you're going to get out of bed to drain that bladder.
And that's not fun.
No, especially if you've got the thermostat turned down in the furnace. And so in order to make sure that you don't have to get out of bed, or at least not as frequently, it's best if you can do your best to drain that before you actually climb in.
And now tip number 4.
Tip number 4 is a pretty standard tip for any time you're outside in the winter, and it's simply make sure you've got layers. But in this case, we're talking about layers on your bed. This is where the heat retention comes in. You've got a warm body, you've got things that are producing heat for you. Now you need to make sure that you've got something that's actually holding all of that warmth in. And so, in our case, in the winter, we've got a sheet on our bed, followed by a blanket, followed by another blanket, and then...
followed by another blanket on me.
Yeah, another blanket, a fuzzy blanket on Paula's side. And then we also have started using a sleeping bag as well, just opened up completely to make it kind of like a quilt. The reason why layers are really important is because, first of all, whenever you've got all of them on there, you've got a really massive amount of insulation on top of you to keep all that body heat in. But if you do get too warm, then you can actually start peeling some of those layers off. And then if you get too cold again, you can start putting the layers back on. It's really important that you make sure that you are able to maintain the optimal temperature, because too cold means obviously you're cold. Too warm, though, means that you start to sweat. And once again, sweating is the last thing you want. Another thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to actually cover your face at any point with any of those blankets that you've got on top of you. Because unfortunately, whenever it's cold outside and you put blankets over your head, all of your breath is going to form condensation on the inside of your blankets. And once again, dampness is bad in the cold weather. So instead, you should try to, if you need to, try and wear a toque or a balaclava, something that covers your face if you find that your face is getting cold, but still allows your breath to come out on top of the blankets instead of underneath.
The other thing I like to do is layer my clothing. So I like to have like a long sleeve t-shirt, and then maybe a sweatshirt, and then my fuzzy pants and my fuzzy socks.
No, cut that. That's not a good tip. I don't like that tip.
It's true.
Go to bed with as little clothing as you possibly can.
Again, not that kind of channel. Moving on to tip number 5.
So tip number 5 is actually just a great tip for keeping your van or camper warm while you're sleeping and even while you're still awake. We've got insulation in our van, and we actually added a bunch of insulation whenever we first renovated our van before we moved into it. However, the insulation that's in here is still nowhere near as much as what would be in a typical house that's in this kind of climate. And so whenever the wind is blowing outside, it's able to pull a lot of that heat that's escaping through our insulation, and it pulls it away, and it cools us down in here a lot quicker. So we have to keep our furnace going and do a lot of other things that are going to keep it a lot warmer than we would have to if that heat wasn't drawn away. So the thing that we recommend for that is actually just to do your best to park your camper or your van in a way that the wind doesn't hit you as much. And so when we happen to be parked in a Walmart, in a parking lot where there's other people like us, we do our best to actually get to know some of the other people and park in a group if possible, so that each of our vehicles block the wind from each other. In the summer, typically, whenever you're parked at a Walmart, people like to keep their distance a little bit to have their privacy. But in the winter, people just seem to pull together a lot more.
They really do.
Yeah, and it becomes a little bit more of a little mini community for the couple of nights that you're all together. And so if you're not in a parking lot, though, then, let's just say you're out in the country somewhere, do your best to park next to some trees or some other building that you can find. Anything that's going to cut down on that wind.
Yeah, a windbreak is really important. But if all else fails,
just camp yourself in front of that furnace for a little while and you'll warm right up.
This is so warm. My nose is cold.